Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into something really cool today, the life of Alfred Russel
Oh,
Wallace.
this is going to be good.
You might recognize the name.
Yeah.
Maybe you know him as like the co-discoverer of natural selection with Darwin, but there's way more to him than that.
Right.
We're going to be using Michael Shermer's book, The Borderlands of Science, for this deep dive.
Okay, cool.
It frames Wallace as this, brilliant naturalist, a real pioneer for evolutionary theory, but also as someone who got into some pretty controversial stuff.
That's true, yeah.
So he was kind of walking this line between, accepted science
Right.
and then ideas that were maybe a little out there for his time.
Yeah, and I think it's that paradox
Yeah.
that makes Wallace so interesting to study.
Right.
Shermer talks about this concept of like a heretic personality.
Okay.
And it seems like Wallace kind of embodies that.
Oh, interesting.
It's like this combination of personality traits, like being super conscientious and agreeable, but also really open to new experiences.
Okay, so he was dedicated to his work,
Yes.
got along well with people,
Uh-huh.
but was maybe a little too willing to accept new ideas.
Yeah, that's one way to put it.
Okay.
And, those traits can be like a double-edged sword, right?
Wait, how so?
Well, they can make you more likely to consider, like, really outside-the-box concepts.
Yeah.
But you're also more susceptible to accepting fringe beliefs
Hmm.
without being critical enough.
Yeah, I see.
And that's where we see Wallace kind of going into these borderlands of science that Shermer talks about.
Yeah, and Shermer has some wild stories about this.
Yeah.
There's this one where Wallace goes head to head with a group of flat earthers.
No way, seriously.
I know. It seems crazy that a scientist of his caliber
Right.
would even bother with something like that.
Yeah, you'd think he'd have better things to do.
Exactly. But he was super committed to disproving this
Wow.
obviously ridiculous claim. So he even designs this experiment
Oh, wow.
on the Bedford Canal to prove the Earth's curvature.
And how did that go?
Well, he won the bet,
Obviously.
but I'm guessing that didn't really change the mind of the flat earther, right?
Uh-huh. No, probably not.
Yeah, this guy, John Hampton, he just refused to accept the results
Oh, man.
and spent the next 15 years harassing Wallace about it.
No way. That's commitment to a lost cause.
I know, right? Talk about holding a grudge.
Wow, yeah.
So on one hand, we have Wallace, the staunch defender of science, never backing down even when people attacked him personally.
Yeah.
But then there's this other side to him, the side that gets really sucked into this whole lost poem Poe thing.
Yeah. Leonani.
This is where I feel like his openness to new experiences and his willingness to believe might have taken him a little too far.
Possibly.
He becomes totally convinced that this poem,
Yeah.
which appears out of nowhere,
Right.
is a real Edgar Allan Poe poem that was channeled from beyond the grave.
It's a wild story.
He believed a poem was dictated by a ghost. That's a pretty big leap for a scientist.
It is. It is.
What made him think that was even possible?
Well, he had his reasons. I guess as strange as they seem to us now.
Like what?
I mean, the poem itself did have a kind of Poe-ish feel to it.
Okay.
And the whole story of how it was discovered was pretty mysterious. But the evidence supporting it being like an actual Poe work was pretty thin.
I bet. So did he ever realize it was a hoax?
But despite all the evidence pointing to it being a fake,
Yeah.
Wallace just wouldn't let go of his belief.
Wow.
He even came up with these elaborate explanations for why all the evidence was wrong.
Really?
Oh, yeah. He even accused some pretty well-respected literary figures of being involved in a conspiracy.
That's pretty intense. Okay, so we have this picture of Wallace,
Yeah.
this brilliant scientific mind who helped us understand evolution, but also embraces things like spiritualism, phrenology, even mesmerism.
Yeah, he was into a lot of stuff.
It's like he was living in two totally different worlds.
And to understand that, seeming contradiction,
yeah.
I think we need to consider what was going on at the time.
Okay, sure.
The 19th century was a time of huge intellectual change and upheaval. And spiritualism and phrenology were having a moment.
Really?
Oh, yeah, they were capturing the public's imagination.
Oh.
And even getting the attention of some scientists.
So these weren't just fringe ideas that people whispered about in secret.
No, not at all.
Wow.
They were being discussed and debated by intellectuals.
Huh. That's interesting.
Yeah. And figures like George Combe, he was a prominent phrenologist.
Okay.
He was trying to connect these concepts to natural laws.
Okay.
To create a scientific framework for understanding the mind and human behavior.
Interesting.
And that idea of finding like these grand unifying explanations for things
Yeah.
would have totally resonated with Wallace.
That makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, he was all about finding those big connections, those underlying principles that could explain everything.
It seems like he was trying to bridge the gap between science and spirituality.
Yeah, I think so.
Like, he wanted to find a way to make those two worlds fit together.
Right, and that's what makes his story so fascinating.
Totally.
He wasn't just some gullible believer.
Yeah.
He brought the same rigor to his spiritualist investigations that he did to his scientific work.
So he wasn't just going to seances and taking everything at face value.
No, not at all.
Interesting.
He meticulously documented his experiences. He examined the rooms,
Wow.
gathered witness testimonies,
Really?
and even tried to control for trickery.
So he was like a scientific detective for the spiritual realm.
Basically, yeah, he was trying to unravel these mysteries using the tools of science.
That's wild.
It is, and it really shows how committed he was to understanding these phenomena.
Yeah, and how seriously he took them.
Absolutely.
It's like he was trying to push the boundaries of science itself.
Exactly, and that's what we're going to explore further in our next part of this deep dive.
Can't wait. See you all next time. So we left off talking about Wallace's meticulous approach to studying seances.
Right.
Trying to find scientific explanations for levitation, spirit communication, all that stuff.
Exactly.
Did he ever come to any conclusions about what he was seeing?
Well, that's the good question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, some of the things he witnessed, like a medium producing fresh flowers in the middle of winter.
Wait, hold on.
Yeah.
Fresh flowers in winter?
Yeah.
Okay, now that's just weird.
It is pretty strange.
That does sound pretty hard to explain.
It does. It really does.
And that kind of stuff pushed him deeper into spiritualism.
Yeah, it did. But remember,
Okay.
he wasn't just blindly accepting these things.
Right.
He always tried to find some rational explanation,
Okay.
some natural law that could account for what he was seeing.
So even when he was dealing with the supernatural, he was
Yeah.
still trying to be a scientist about it.
Exactly.
That's interesting.
It is.
Did he ever find those natural laws he was looking for?
Well, not exactly.
Okay.
But his search for those laws
Yeah.
led him to some pretty radical conclusions.
Like what?
Well, for example, he started to believe that consciousness itself couldn't be explained by purely material processes.
Okay, so like our thoughts or feelings,
Yeah.
he thought those couldn't just come from our brains.
Right. He felt there had to be something more.
Something more.
Yeah, some kind of overruling intelligence
Okay.
that was guiding the evolution of the human mind.
So he's basically saying that natural selection can explain how our bodies evolved, but not how we develop things like abstract thought, creativity, morality.
Exactly. He argued that natural selection alone couldn't account for the complexity of the human brain,
Right.
the capacity for art, music, mathematics, and all those higher moral faculties.
I mean, yeah, when you think about it,
Yeah.
it is kind of mind-blowing
Okay.
to think that all of that just came from random mutations and survival of the fittest.
Right. It's hard to wrap your head around.
So if he's not buying natural selection as the only explanation
Yeah.
for human consciousness, then what is he suggesting?
Well, he believed that there must be some kind of guiding force,
Okay.
an intelligence that was shaping human mental evolution.
Like some kind of higher power.
In a way, yeah.
Huh.
Remember that quote from Wallace?
Which one?
The one where he said, "All force may be will force."
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
That kind of gives you a glimpse into his thinking.
Yeah, it's like he's suggesting that there's a conscious will behind the universe
Right.
that's directing the evolution of our minds.
It's a pretty radical idea.
It is. Even back then, that must have been a pretty controversial thing to say.
Oh, it was. It definitely ruffled some feathers in the scientific community.
I bet.
A lot of his colleagues were baffled by his embrace of spiritualism.
Yeah.
They saw it as like betraying his scientific principles.
But he didn't see it that way.
No, not at all. He argued that his spiritualist investigations
Yeah.
were just another form of scientific inquiry,
Okay.
just focused on phenomena that current science couldn't explain.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
It is, isn't it?
So he's saying just because we don't have the tools to understand something
Right.
doesn't mean it's not worthy of scientific exploration.
Exactly. And,
Okay.
he even compared his work to fields like meteorology or biology,
Oh, okay.
where there's still so much we don't know,
Yeah, that's true.
but we don't dismiss them as unscientific just because they're not perfectly predictable.
So he's drawing a parallel between the mysteries of the natural world and the mysteries of the spiritual realm.
Right.
Suggesting that both are worthy of scientific study.
Exactly. He felt that science should be open to exploring all phenomena,
Okay.
even those that challenge conventional thinking.
So for him, his spiritualist beliefs and his scientific work weren't at odds. They were all part of the same pursuit.
Exactly. He saw them as two sides of the same coin.
That's a pretty bold stance.
It is.
Especially for someone who was already pushing the boundaries with his work on evolution.
Yeah, he was definitely not afraid to go against the grain.
Did all of this end up hurting his reputation in the scientific community?
That's a tough question.
Yeah.
I mean, some of his colleagues definitely distanced themselves from his more unorthodox views.
Sure.
And his spiritualist leanings definitely caused some controversy.
Yeah.
But he was already such a respected figure.
Right.
And his contributions to evolutionary theory were undeniable.
It is fascinating how he managed to hold those two seemingly contradictory sides.
It is.
The rigorous scientist
Yeah.
and the ardent spiritualist,
Right.
without one completely overshadowing the other.
Yeah. It speaks to the complexity of the human mind. I think
Oh, my
Wallace,
days.
like all of us, was driven by this deep desire to understand the world.
Yeah.
And that led him down some pretty unconventional paths.
It makes you wonder, though,
Yeah.
did his exploration of the spiritual realm ultimately lead him closer to the truth?
Good question.
Or further away? I mean, was he a visionary who was ahead of his time? Or was he just blinded by his belief in things that science couldn't explain?
It's a question that's been debated for a long time.
It is.
And it's one we're going to keep unpacking in the final part of our deep dive.
All right, sounds good. Looking forward to it. Yeah, it really is a question that's fascinated people for over a century.
It has.
Did Wallace's willingness to embrace these kind of unorthodox ideas help his scientific legacy or hurt it?
Yeah, it's tough to say.
It is.
I mean, on the one hand,
Yeah.
his spiritualist beliefs definitely clashed with the scientific worldview of his time.
Oh, for sure.
And even our own to some extent.
It's hard to wrap your head around it sometimes, you
That's
know?
what I mean.
This is the guy who co-discovered natural selection.
Right.
Like one of the most important concepts in biology.
Absolutely.
And yet he also believed in spirit communication.
Yeah.
And a conscious force guiding evolution.
I know, it seems contradictory.
It does.
But you have to remember, Wallace wasn't the only one interested in spiritualism.
Oh, really?
Yeah, a lot of intellectuals in the 19th century were exploring these ideas, trying to make sense of the unexplained.
I guess that makes sense.
And for Wallace, it wasn't about rejecting science.
Okay.
It was about pushing its boundaries.
So he really believed that these spiritualist phenomena were just part of the natural world.
Yeah.
Just things that science hadn't figured out how to explain yet.
Exactly.
It's like he saw them as clues to a bigger picture of the universe.
Right. And that desire to connect things.
Yeah.
To find a unifying theory.
Right.
That resonates with a lot of scientists even today.
So maybe instead of seeing his spiritualism as a weakness, we can view it as just another expression of his curiosity.
That's a good way to put it.
His drive to find the truth.
Yeah.
No matter where it led him.
I think that's fair.
Even if it meant exploring some pretty unconventional ideas.
Absolutely.
It does make you wonder, though.
What's that?
If maybe his openness to these fringe ideas held him back in some way.
How so?
What if he'd focus all his energy on more mainstream science?
Interesting question.
Do you think he could have accomplished even more?
I mean, it's impossible to know for sure, of course.
Yeah.
But, you know,
Yeah.
scientific progress often comes from people who think outside the box.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
People who challenge the status quo.
Right.
Explore new ideas.
People like Wallace.
Exactly. And that's part of what makes his story so compelling.
He was a total maverick.
He was.
A true heretic personality.
Like Shermer said.
And I think that's why we're still talking about him today.
I agree.
He reminds us that science is about more than just facts and figures.
Right.
It's about our quest to understand the universe.
Absolutely.
Even if that quest takes us to some unexpected places.
And even if those places are a little controversial.
Exactly.
Well, for anyone listening who's now fascinated by Alfred Russel Wallace, I highly recommend checking out Michael Shermer's The Borderlands of Science.
It's a great book.
It really makes you think about the line between science and pseudoscience.
Yeah. And how we decide what's real and what's not.
It's a journey that'll challenge your assumptions, for sure.
And maybe even change your perspective on things.
And hopefully leave you with a deeper appreciation for the scientific process.
And the mysteries of the human mind.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.
Yeah. We'll see you next time.